Serious, job applicants who walked out of an interview before it was over. Why did you do it? The job was advertised as morning shift. The interviewer starts to explain how I would be used as a wild card to fill any shift that was needed, including short notice. Edit. Got another one. Went to a job interview for a listing listed as job at a huge high-tech firm on the West Coast. All it was a recruiter scouting for people. There was no interviews with any company. He just wanted to build my profile. He explained that if he found me a job I would be an employee of his for 2 years before I would be an employee for the actually company. I wanted to bail then, but as soon as he said I wouldn't have any benefits and minimum wage, I noped the fuck out. Got up, grabbed my coat. I was shaking my head while putting on my coat, and as I was walking out he said, "I'll just put you down as a lost cause." I am familiar with headhunters and was working with 2 other headhunters at that time. His terms were just straight robbery. I love how a lot of places feel like it's okay to advertise one position as if it's a completely different position and wonder why they can't find anyone to fill it. It goes the other way around as well. Often positions are advertised with requirements the company doesn't actually need. I see this in my department sometimes. The job description says applicant must have skill X, so I'm asking, why do we require this? We don't even use X. Oh, it's no problem. If they don't know X, we still give the resume to you guys. Engineers are literal minded. If you tell them they need to have skill X and they don't have it, then many simply won't bother to apply. It seems impossible to get HR to understand this. Also, we sometimes write requirements like needs to have N years experience doing X in industry Y. We don't use X any differently than in any other industry, so why make it dependent on that? I accidentally walked out on an interview. I had driven 4 hours to apply for a bar gaming room job in preparation for moving cities for study. I had purchased an apartment, so I kinda had to take job searching seriously. I had spent about 20 minutes talking to the gaming manager, during which time the venue manager joined us. When some guy came up to them and started chatting to them, I sat there for maybe 5-10 minutes, wondering if the interview was over. When I decided that most questions had been asked and my existence had barely been acknowledged since the guy had rocked up, I half interrupted, shook one of the interviewer's hands and said thanks, and exited the premises with no idea how the interview went. Was crossing the road to my car, when one of the interviewers chased me across the road and offered me the position. Turns out the guy interrupting the interview was one of the owners of the venue. I sometimes wonder how I get through life considering how socially inept I can be. I'm fairly socially inept myself at times, but even I know that one wasn't your fault. They should have at least said, "Oh, this is so-and-so, the venue owner," to you briefly before getting into a 5-10 minute conversation with him. They screwed up, not you, which is probably why they still offered you the job. 1. You probably didn't answer anything wrong, or better, you unsweeted well. 2. When he interrupted, what he said was, "My time is valuable." 3. When he shook hands he said, "Thank you for taking the time to talk to me." 4. When walking out he said, "I have other offers." This dude basically came in, swung his dick around, laughed and walked away. That venue manager had a tear in his eye remembering when he was a cocky little fuck. Best part is he didn't even know he was doing it. Fuck my life. Yet, standard social etiquette dictates that introductions are made. Your reaction was entirely appropriate. They failed to introduce you or the owner. Assuming 10 minutes and that you're done is pretty reasonable. I was told about 40 minutes into an interview that the job I was interviewing for was going to be a 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. position. This had never been mentioned in the original job posting, or in the preliminary call prior to the interview. This wasn't for a gas station job or anything either. High-profile law firm who basically needed a graphic designer to put together presentation materials overnight for use the following day. They also set it so that I'd be working hours just barely under the limit to qualify as a full-time employee with benefits. Again, none of this was ever mentioned in the job description up to this point. The last straw was that they gave me a 30-minute test to prove I could work on a deadline, based on the actual materials I'd be working with: chick and scratch post-it notes, unintelligible audio recordings, and other horrible sources I had to base my designs on. I walked out of the test about 5 minutes in. Yet, fuck people like this. I expect you to do elite-level work for part-time pay, shitty hours and no benefits. If you want good people, you generally have to pay them. I've been looking for a job recently and some of the companies hiring must be fucking delusional. We are looking for a graduate in a quantitative subject, with at least 2 years experience to come and work for minimum wage. The sad part is that they will find someone to work under those conditions. They realize with no oversight and people desperate for a working wage, they have the advantage. Plus, experience has value as well, so they're pretty much holding all the cards at this point. Was going to be at 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. position. That's my dream job. Edit, guys, I'm an idiot. I had read that as 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. In my country we use the 24H format, so I would write 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. as 23H6H. I had this but one better: 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., 10 hours 3 days a week to qualify for benefits including health insurance. I didn't have much to do either. It was a security job for a very quiet building, so you were encouraged to bring a laptop and movies to keep busy, and the kitchen provided a meal and topped off the coffee before they left for the night. I learned a number of other skills doing the job, and employed in an awesome career based on the skills I taught myself. Fantastic job if you're up for the schedule. Just after I had been given 3 months notice of layoff due to office closure from a job that I really liked, I took off early one day for an interview across town. When I arrived, I entered a waiting room full of people at least twice my age, in suits, resumes in hand. Upon seeing this sight, I realized I had very little chance at the position being offered, but since I was there I may as well try. What I didn't expect is that we were all scheduled to interview together. We were all herded into a conference room, where the group interview commenced. After a few rounds of questions, learning each other's qualifications, how we would handle various situations, and so on, we collectively learned that this position was part-time, not what had been advertised, and paid a mere $9 an hour. I walked out along with 3 other people. Only 3. Gotta wonder what put all those older, well-dressed business types in such dire situations that they were even considering that. It was late 2008. The job market was awful at the time, but I think they just stayed to be polite at that point. I walked out of an interview before it began once. The interview was scheduled for 10 a.m., which I double-checked from the voicemail that they left. I showed up about 10 minutes early, signed in, all that jazz, and waited, and waited, and waited. 45 minutes later I got up, asked the receptionist, who looked seriously embarrassed, to let my interviewer know I was no longer interested, and left. 2 hours later I got a rude call asking if I had forgotten the appointment. I laughed and hung up. I had the opposite experience. Talked to a guy over the phone about a general labor job. He told me to be at a shop at 6:30. He said he was very strict about time, so I was there at 6:15 just to be sure. Get there the following day and proceed to be screamed the fuck out for not being there at 6 o'clock. I tried to be polite and say I must have misheard, even though I've never been so sure about something someone has said, but he insisted I was wrong and that I'd get out. Can't help but feel I'm better off not having him as an employer. It sounds like you missed a bullet there. Probably a good thing he didn't hire you. My boss is like that. He'll tell me to cut a length of 2x4 and then chew me out when he realizes he gave me the wrong length and it's too short. I don't think I'll be working with him too much longer. He's got issues. On a side note, a painter who knew my boss since the 70s said his old nickname was Crash and Burn since back in the day he managed to crash his car and burn down his apartment in a couple of days. Same exact thing happened to me, on my birthday no less. I waited over an hour, because my parents were really pressuring me to find a job. Edit. I was 17 at the time. I know a birthday is just another day, and yes, I have since worked on my birthday. I was mainly upset because I had plans with a friend who was just in town for a couple of hours. It was crazy. To clarify, this wasn't an entry-level thing where they were getting a ton of applicants. This was for a lead position in the IT field. I worked in HR as clerical staff for a big box retailer, and they routinely made people wait crazy long for interviews. If have to apologize and practically make the managers did the interviews. But if applicants were even a minute late, we were told to refuse them. All the while I'm getting pressured to find applicants that are good. For what? So you can make them wait forever, get a second interview and then not hire them? Fuck that. This seems to be how all places work now. I work fast food, we hire people at minimum wage, no better, ever. If you're offered a promotion and don't take it, you get blacklisted from promotions for years. One guy who has been with the company for 5-6 years as a shift manager was offered the assistant manager position at another store. He said no, as he's been at one store for 2-3 years now and they just qualified for an assistant manager position, so he wanted to wait for that. The company then promoted some other guy into the assistant manager at that shift's store, and is refusing to give him a promotion. They're also massively hurting for assistant general managers. I wonder why. I know a bank in Brazil that has this policy. I also know a guy that worked in that bank, that was deaf in one ear. He was born without ear canal in one side of his head. He has only the external part of the ear on that side. They wanted to promote him from a leadership position to a managerial position, but that had to spend most of the time working with people, instead of coding or sitting alone in an office, so he declined, but was too embarrassed to disclose that was because he was deaf. Almost knew. He did his best to hide the issue. For example, he would read people's lips without letting them know. The bank got so pissed off he declined the promotion that would result in a huge pay increase, that they just outright fired the guy. Promoted past your core competency is one of the absolute dumbest things in corporate managerial idiocy. If someone is a brilliant programmer but a terrible people person, you don't fucking put them in charge of people, not matter how much more money or status the position holds. Some people like what they do, know their limits, and don't want to become some useless manager who does no actual work and spends all their time in pointless meeting and deciding who to fire for refusing to climb the managerial ladder with you. It's common in fast food, typo, but we're leaving it, and even chains like Chili's, Jif, to move management newbies to a new location, because they want them to learn from strangers, ensure they have good people skills, and alienate them from their long-term work friends, so they don't enable them. This is probably intentional on their part. Most sane people look at job interviews as a chance for an employer to interview the candidate and for the candidate to interview the employer. If you're hurting for a low-skill job, like floor sales at a big box store, you typically have a much larger pool of potential hires than a company who needs skilled workers. Consequently, workers are interchangeable and expendable. Because of this, it is important to weed out any candidates who have high self-esteem, who are not desperate, or who are otherwise too smart to work there. If you make them wait an extra hour or two before the interview, then anyone with any self-esteem will walk out, and you'll be left with the desperate, the naive, and the easily controlled candidates. I waited 2 hours for an interview. The interviewer showed up, apologized for being late, found out the room she intended to interview me and wasn't accessible anymore because it was too late, and ended up interviewing me on a bench in a hallway simultaneously with another candidate. We both got the job, and I enjoyed the work, but that interview was ridiculous. Not that this kind of clusterfuck is excusable, but having been on the other side of it, a disorganized interview process doesn't necessarily imply anything about the working environment. I work at a mid-sized company as a software developer, and sometimes you'll just get an email from HR like, BTW, you're giving an interview tomorrow morning. and then the next morning your piece of the website is down and you're the only one who can fix it, and interviewing isn't really your job and you didn't have any time to prepare. Usually you can scramble to swap places with another interviewer, but if it's an early or late time slip, people might not be around in the office to replace you. Edit. To clarify a few things, if something like this happens we always notify HR within a few minutes, so I guess my scenario is more forgivable than having no communication. I guess you can hold it against the working environment that HR is so disorganized about the interview process, but other than that I never have to deal with HR and my bosses don't do shit like that. Interviewing is an event that happens infrequently. I've given about 5 interviews and I've been at the company 3 years. This happened to me once. I showed up 15 minutes early. I waited for 2 hours. Then I was told by the receptionist that the guy isn't able to interview me today. I thanked her and left. He called me about 3 hours later, apologized and offered me the job right there. He ended up getting fired shortly before I left. If he was willing to hire someone sight unseen, he knew he wouldn't be there long. 2 hours later I got a rude call asking if I had forgotten the appointment. I think the answer to that is, how long did you expect me to wait around for you, douchebag? I posted this a couple years ago, but may as well post it again for this thread. So, had an interview at a Starbucks for some kind of marketing insurance company. The lady said that they don't market themselves and they rely on word of mouth. Yeah, red flag number 1. Then she said they weren't a pyramid scheme, even though it sounded like one. She said it was multi-level marketing. Red flag number 2. Red flag number 3. She got to the end of the interview and tried to have me sign up for their services. They were a company that supposedly sold insurance, only I'd have to pay in order to have that privilege. She wanted me to put in my credit card number and a bunch of info, including my social security number. I excused myself, thanked the lady for her time, and left. Any company that has to announce they are not a pyramid scheme is a pyramid scheme. I have almost the exact same story. Got a phone call from some guy, claimed that my former manager at the restaurant where I used to work had recommended me for a position at a company that helped brick-and-mortar businesses transition to online sales. I was desperate for work, so I agreed to meet this guy at a Starbucks in the suburbs, without even really knowing what the job was. 5 minutes after I sat down and he started talking at me, I realized I had been swindled. He was talking maniacally all about their top earners, 100 grand a year, make your own money on your own time, we make dimes, you make dollars, and drawing fucking bubble diagrams. It was like this scene. Economics off the office web page, in the office where Jim draws the pyramid over Michael's chart, but this guy drew the pyramid himself and saved me the trouble. And then he name dropped his parent company, Amway. At that point I totally checked out, and this psycho knew. Instantly his demeanor changed. I get the feeling you're not too interested. Why? I said, look, I gotta be honest, I've heard some bad things about Amway. Maybe the words pyramid scheme ring a bell. I don't have the time to invest into this business. And he looked at me with his cold dead eyes and said, I can tell you that anything you've heard about Amway is basically a lie, and then launched right back into his crazy pitch. I let him wear himself out, and said I'll call you. He tried to approach me again when I was smoking in the parking lot and I just waved goodbye until he walked away. These companies are monstrous. The only people who can succeed in them are monsters, and the other 95% are dumb victims who don't know what they're getting into. Fucking pathetic. Amway was their parent company. Did you ever get the name of this company? My brother got involved with Worldwide Group, which is associated with Amway. He actually made a bit of money, but would have ultimately made more at any part-time minimum wage job. He also lost a lot of friends because he kept trying to bring everyone into it. I went into the interview with my prospective supervisor. I looked around the office and noticed that the garbage cans were full, the walls and carpet dirty, and the supervisor's desk was old and had chips out of it. So I mentioned that the company didn't seem to be doing any basic upkeep and then asked point blank, is this a good company to work for? She replied no, and hung her head. I said thanks and walked out. This is the single saddest story I've read so far, and that's including the one about the non-profit that turned out to be scamming homeless and mentally ill people into signing up for expensive cell phone plans. I can't imagine how horrible this must have been for that supervisor. That company has basically broken them as an individual. I recently left a job that made me feel that way. I managed a very small, independent retail store and my bosses were just insane. We had been hemorrhaging staff for a few years. There were 2 people working under me when I left. This summer I started. I think there were 8-10 of us. Couldn't keep people for more than a year. They'd just leave before that second summer season started. I interviewed one person this March and I would have liked to work with her. I'm sure she'd have good at the job, but I suspected that her identity would have made her a target for the boss and I didn't want to put a possibly vulnerable person into a hostile work environment. Then I realized I couldn't put anyone into that environment, no matter how thick their skin. I stopped doing interviews and finally jumped ship myself. My new job is amazing, by the way. Is this a good company to work for? She replied no and hung her head. This is really depressing. Good of her to be honest with you at least. Sounds like you dodged a bullet. Good for her for being truthful. I had a friend that while on interview, she was handed off to someone to show her around. During the facility tour, the guide pulled her into a side room and told her to run away. The place was horrible, and she would be miserable working there. Back in high school, I had an interview at Cold Stone Creamery. They made us break into groups where we had to create and sing a catchy tip song. I'm really shy, so I wanted to walk out before the singing commenced, but I really needed a job, so I decided to try and stick it out. I sang the stupid song. After the songs, they interviewed us one-on-one. For one question, they basically asked us what we thought the weaknesses of our group members were. I told them I didn't know the people well enough to say and that I really didn't want to get a job by bad-mouthing someone else. As I got up to leave, they asked me if I wanted to hear what some of my group members had said about me. I just kept walking. Should have gone with my gut and left before the singing. Unless you're auditioning for a musical, being asked to sing for a job interview should be the reddest of red flags. Glad to have some empirical evidence of that. Well, part of working at Cold Stone is that you have to sing when a customer puts money in the tip jar. They're famous for it. It's a bad idea to get a job there if you don't want to sing. But the badmouth other people think sounds awful. Were they trying to hire the meanest, cattiest employees they could find? What kind of bullshit is that? Ah, didn't realize that. A bit like Johnny Rockets then. Still, for me personally that statement stands. If you ask me to sing and it's not because I'm going to be on stage, we're done here. I used to work at Cold Stone. People gave out so much free ice cream because we made a lot of money on tips. I also worked with some stupidly charismatic people, like, one is on TV now, so when they were making I made a bunch in tips. But yeah, the singing sucked. Luckily when I interviewed there was supposed to be one other person and he didn't show up, so I just got the job. I walked out on an interview only once, and it was because the people organizing it were insane. They had arranged a large-scale interviewing process for the entire city. After getting there early I realized there were quite a few applicants, so I didn't mind the fact that I had to wait for about 3 hours. Eventually they asked a group of 3 of us into an office where we waited again for about 45 minutes. Again I was happy just to have an interview, so I waited. Eventually I met with a manager for the store who asked the standard range of questions and I thought I did pretty well. At the end of the interview though I was asked to sign a waiver, and when I asked why I found out that they had recorded the entire interview for the purpose of an episode of the Current Affairs and didn't tell me beforehand. After waiting for so long just to be disrespected like that I just walked out. I happened to catch the episode later and it featured some of the people who I had waited with in the room. Thank God I didn't sign that waiver, because the angle of the investigation was that unemployed people didn't put any effort into getting jobs, completely ignoring the fact that everyone had to wait 4 hours just to get a chance. TLDR, got hit and cammed at a job interview for a TV show. Edit, I am an Australian. So it was entirely a setup? Like, not even an actual job to be interviewing for? That is so shady and horrible. Goes to show just how manufactured those news-type shows are. They did have one job on offer about 45 minutes away. Apparently all the other applications were just filed in case they wanted someone later. To put it into context, there was about 150 people there, and it turned out just to be over one job. 150 people there, one job. I feel like that's a more worthy news story than anything they were trying to prove. So they want to make a point that unemployed people don't want to look for jobs, so they're setting up an entire operation that prevents unemployed people looking for jobs from getting a job. Sounds about right. Read to me more like the story would have been about how insane it is for people to find jobs. Just look at this mess. People are waiting hours for an interview. If you control what other people see, you can spin it any way you want. I recently went to an interview for a bank in my area. First, the woman I spoke to on the phone misrepresented herself. She told me she was the assistant branch manager. Upon arrival, she told me she was head teller. The branch manager would be arriving shortly. I waited for an hour. After an hour of me double-checking the time and wondering if I'd gotten there instead of early, I got up to leave. The head teller said she'd be there in 5 minutes. But at that point I just figured I obviously wasn't important enough. I left. I got a call back 3 days later apologizing and asking if they could set up another meeting. At a bank I was nowhere near. I politely declined. I once applied for a job for this one marketing place. They called me a few times to schedule an interview, all from the same number, but each time, they told me they were a different company. Needless to say, I ran from them. TLDR, I couldn't actually walk out of the interview, because I broke my foot. I graduated in 2009 with a degree in print journalism, and after a summer of doing random retail stuff, I decided to find a real job. I see a job posting for a marketing specialist, with emphasis in graphic design work. I brought my portfolio, and they told me they were impressed, and that I would get to do some design, writing, and editing. They said they represented big-time companies, so 22-year-old me was incredibly excited. They told me to come back the next day for a job shadow, dressed professionally. I showed up bright and early in my nicest business clothes and heels, and they told me I would be writing with this red-headed girl. Side note, she started where I wound up working a few years later and didn't make it through training. I live on the north side of my city, and we drove all the way south to a residential neighborhood. I wasn't 100% sure what was going on, but they gave me a catalog and said we would be doing door-to-door sales for Sears Home Improvement. I made it 2 hours in the Midwest humidity, dealing with pissed-off homeowners who didn't want to have their homes improved by Sears. While walking onto a driveway, my foot got caught in a rabbit hole and I felt a snap. I couldn't put any weight on it, and told red-headed girl I needed to go. She panicked, saying she needed to meet her quota for the day. I asked if we could take an early lunch, so we went to Arby's, where she and the rest of the sales crew left me with a swollen foot. I had to call my dad to pick me up. He worked an hour and a half away. He dropped me off at my car, and I drove with my injured right foot home. Yep, that helped. Nope. I went to urgent care, and discovered I had an avulsion fracture on the top of my foot. Yes, it was Matrix Resources. Stupid. Same thing happened to me. They said I would be a technician for their company, which then turned to its salesperson, and then to salesperson. 2 hours later, after walking through the city trying to sell raffle tickets, I kinda just left the lady with me hanging. If they're going to pull that shit on me, I'm not going to politely leave. I also took her umbrella. This type of job thing happened to my wife too, and it pissed me off to the extreme. She went to an interview looking for an editing job. They did the whole same thing they said to you and wanted her back the next day to shadow. The next day happened to be our anniversary, but because she really wanted a job and they had made her excited, I told her it was okay and could be worth it. She showed up next day and they sent her with someone to do door-to-door sales. She did the whole 8 hours with them on our anniversary. Fuck that place. It was a security guard job. I was way overqualified but need to pay bills. Sat down across from a dead-eyed young woman who worked in HR. She read interview questions from a computer screen in monotone, typing my answers up as we went. Was kind of pissed and snappy. I answered all the questions really well, but sometimes she didn't feel it filled the exact questions. I'm guessing that she was really unhelpful. Like she would ask, please describe a situation or day where you and your coworkers were given an unexpected assignment, difficulty, or mistake and had to multitask to balance the new workload with current duties. I went into detail about how that was a daily experience at one of my positions. Nope, didn't cut it with her. She stared blankly and said that didn't answer the question. Then she repeats the long-ass question word for word. Specific instructions. As much a red flag about the company as her. Still, she was so rude about the entire thing. You could tell she really didn't want to be there. After trying to answer one question 3 times, each time her repeating the question like I was retarded, she wouldn't even explain what I was saying wrong. I just apologized, saying I changed my mind about the job and walked about without explanation. Got a much better paralegal job 2 weeks later. It doesn't sound that bad, but you didn't hear the totally unjustified contempt in her voice. So uncalled for. I tried to kill it with kindness, just didn't work. The paranoid part of me thinks she was doing that to ensure you could be as dull and unimaginative as management would want their security guards to be. I say this as someone who worked security while overqualified once. My theory as well, at least I think it was part of it. It was retail security, so it was probably their standard way of weeding out people who won't put up with the bullshit of retail. Still, I think her attitude went beyond the standard, dehumanizing answering the verbatim questions on the screen. Maybe she thought that you were a nice person and wanted to subtly warn you off of what would turn out to be a terrible job. Ah, brother. I worked for this company and they are called Guardsmark. They treat their employees like dog shit. I had the same experience with HR. They treated me with open contempt. Wouldn't pay me my overtime, saying they had gone over for that month. That maybe they could pay it next month. When I quit, I was supposed to turn in my guard license. I told the lady I couldn't find it. She told me that wasn't good enough. And I told her it was good enough for me and there wasn't anything she could do about it. They get away with treating their employees like subhumans because they almost exclusively hire recent ex-military and take advantage of their programming to be subservient. I had an ex-colonel for a boss and he would bark orders and berate the guards. All the ex-military guys would cower like he had total control over their lives. I was like, who the fuck does this guy think he is? I could walk out of here right now and have the same kind of shitty job by the end of the week and he'd have to work the rest of my shift. Wouldn't pay me my overtime, saying they had gone over for that month. That's not my problem. Either pay me what I am owed now, or pay me more later when my lawyer gets involved. I had just graduated art school with a design degree and was scraping by, unemployed and living 5,000 kilometers from my hometown for 6 months. I was getting desperate and antsy when I saw an ad for a multimedia designer on a job board. I called and set up a time for an interview. I didn't have a car, so I called a cab to take me to the address. I was still relatively new to the city, and the cab took me very, very far out, like a half-hour drive. Eventually, the cab pulled over in front of a bland, suburban house. Something was off. Even the driver was suspicious. "Are you sure you want to get dropped off here?" he asked, sensing my nervousness. I was confused. I didn't really know where I was. This was an era before iPhones, not that I could have afforded one. And my shitty flip phone was dying. Yeah, sure. Just wait for me. If you see me going, you can leave. I walked up to the front door, which had a sign with an arrow, instructing visitors to go around back. As I walked alongside the house, I turned back and noticed that my taxi driver, assuming I was fine, had driven away. When I found the back entrance, I was greeted by two middle-aged, balding white men, in a basement rec room that had been converted into an office. "Hi. I'm here for the interview." One of the men got up. Yes, that's fine. We just need you to fill out a questionnaire. It should take 30 minutes. I looked to my left. A poster hung on the wall, the portrait of a vaguely familiar, bald white man, surrounded by a glowing rainbow of swirling colors and energy beams. It was L. Ron Hubbard. "Sure," I said. "I just have to let the cab driver know we can leave." I promptly proceeded to walk out the door, picked a random direction, and walked for 40 minutes along the road until I found a bus stop. Okay, this one made me laugh pretty hard. It's the best nope story I've heard where the word wasn't actually ever mentioned. OMG, was this Canada? My home city has some of the craziest Scientologists. I never got as far as the interview. So much was wrong. I received a call asking me about my availability to attend an interview, based on my posting on a professional website. I indicated that I was currently in the middle of a project, but would be available to interview in 2 weeks. The woman on the phone yelled, "Then call me back when you are available!" Click. She called me. She yelled at me. I wrote that company off. 2 days later she called me again and asked to set up the interview. She said she would call me as soon as she had finished a meeting. You called me, then you tell me you don't have time to finish the conversation that you initiated. Wrote her and her entire corporation off. Get a phone call 3 hours later. So-and-so wants you to call her to schedule an interview on Monday. I definitely no longer want this job, but I do want to see if my predictions come true. I call on Monday. The person who answered the phone told me that it was the woman caller's day off. I am a genius. They call me and give me the runaround. WTF. 2 weeks later, yesterday, they call me again. Again, a person asks me to call at a later date to schedule an interview with a woman who couldn't bother to call me herself. I told them that based on their behavior in the past month on the phone, that I did not have any desire to work for their company. I broke my own code and fired off an email to their director of human resources. This company is a luxury retirement community. There are golf courses, hospitals, clinics, 4 to 6 bedroom homes, clubhouses, townhomes, etc. It seemed like T might be a lovely place to work in my field. If they would treat me in such an unprofessional manner, how must they treat the residents of the community? There were 3 total callers involved. I can only imagine the motives for calling someone, asking for an interview and then behaving in such a strange fashion. Nope. I had an hour person at a reasonably well-known company send me an email asking if I was willing to have a job interview. Sure, sounds good. I gave half a dozen times I would be available. A week later I realized all the times had passed, so I emailed her asking what was up. She said, "Oh, sorry, things are busy here, give me a few more times." So I did. A week later I realized all the times had passed again, so I emailed her again. She asked for another batch of times. I sent them. I got an auto response. She just gone on vacation for a week. I haven't heard back since. I had an hour woman interview me and tell me she was sure I would get the job. Second interview comes and the next guy seems impressed with me. The HR woman calls me and says I got the job, congrats. She'll send me an offer letter. Week passes, still nothing. I call her and she says, "Oh yes, it's just been busy here, we'll send it out today." Nothing. Call again and she's on vacation. I call her 3 more times and she says that she's about to send it. I never got anything and just cut contact with her. IDKWTF she was doing to me. I walked out about halfway through because the dude was too busy on his phone. I thought maybe he was recording my responses in his phone. Then he laid the phone down on the table to write down some of what I was saying and noticed it was his Facebook open. I got up and walked out. I had a feeling he wasn't paying attention to anything I was saying. The dude was the head paramedic or whatever at the ambulance company I applied to. I just imagine people are dying in front of his face while he's using his Facebook. You should have messed with him. Should have started saying nonsense and seeing if he realized, yeah, I work well in a team. My father and I often take turns to piss on my mother and younger brother as they are sleeping. It is all okay with them, of course, as they do it to us. There was one job I had applied for. I was getting desperate for work as I hadn't had a job in months. It was a fast food position, at the other end of the city, a 45-minute bus ride away if traffic was nice. I got there for the interview. Everything was going well. Then the manager mentioned that the position would only have a few hours per week, less than 20, at minimum wage. I did some mental math and realized that it wouldn't be enough to cover my monthly bills. At that point I thanked him for his time, and told him that I just couldn't take the position as I wouldn't be making enough to pay my bills. It ended amicably. He said he understood and was sorry that he just couldn't offer more hours. After my brother started high school, my mom wanted to go back to work. She applied for all these jobs but no one wanted to hire her. Somebody called my mom up and asked her for an interview. They were looking for a receptionist and someone gave them her resume. They spoke on the phone for a while, then gave Mom the address for the interview. She googled the address and the site for a high-class escort service brothel. She didn't go. We also never found out how they got a hold of her resume because we certainly didn't send it to them. It was a bait and switch. Looked like a film TV production job, but turned out to be this weird sales marketing position. Outbound calls and traveling to stores to sell displays, something like that. I wasn't rude, but I called the guy out. Said the job he was talking about didn't really match the description on Craigslist. That should have been my first indicator. He said something like, "It's a job, right?" and shrugged. I thanked him for his time and walked out. I couldn't have been there more than 5 minutes. I hate the bait and switch. I got a job working for a well-known cell phone company and was told I'd be making $32K a year. Turns out you get $10 an hour in commission. Sadly, it was my first job out of college and I wasn't smart enough to realize you should get these things in writing. I was let go when I told them I wasn't going to sell 10 gig data plans in an area that didn't even have a 3G network. Many years ago, an old friend of mine and I worked for a prepaid cell phone company. This was late 90s, a time before free long distance and iPhones. It was inbound sales and it was awful. They would contract out with other cell phone companies to use their cell towers, so they claimed nationwide service, but actually didn't have it. The per minute fees were ridiculous, and the phone was a piece of shit. One day, my friend walks in, holding his headset in his hands. We'd been talking about how much we hated the job. Senior citizens would call because they just wanted a phone for emergencies. This might have been before they passed a law that said all cell phones need to dial 911 even if they don't have service. We would assure them the phone was exactly what they needed. There was a restocking fee if you opened the box, but you weren't notified of the fee until you opened the box. Awful company. So my friend walks into the call center, comes up to me, says, "Sorry, dude. You're on your own. I just can't do it anymore." He then proceeds to quit. I needed the job as I was saving to move to LA, so I stuck it out a little longer. The next week they closed the call center, moved it to Texas and gave us all $1,000 severance. My friend, who had gotten an awesome job working inbound sales for Bose, was a little frustrated, but he got over me. I got a cool grand and took the desk next to his at Bose. By far the easiest money I've ever made. Anyway, your response reminded me of that job. Another total bait and switch, except this time I was the baiter and switcher. They flat out lied to me about what I was interviewing for. I was told it was for a technician trainee position, but it was really for an unpaid internship that had 12-hour days and a mandatory 6-month period before I could move on to a paid job. which would have started out at $11 per hour. When I was told, I just told him it wasn't worth my time and got up to walk out. He got all mad and said, "Son, you have to show your worth first," and I just said, "Sir, I have fucking bills to pay, and as much as I'd like to conform to your wishes so that I could have a career, I don't live in a fantasy world where I can just focus on work." I'm sure if you'd stayed long enough he would have gone on about bootstraps and personal responsibility. Unpaid internships are illegal in the United States except for government jobs, non-profits, and a couple other rare exceptions that requires the employer to not directly profit off of any work you do. My guess is that if you had taken the job and worked the 6 months, you could have filed a wage claim and gotten paid for that work, along with penalties to your employer. Yep. There are federal laws regarding unpaid internships. Basically, if it doesn't meet the below, the intern has to be paid. The internship, even though it includes actual operation of the facilities of the employer, is similar to training which would be given in an educational environment. The internship experience is for the benefit of the intern. The intern does not displace regular employees, but works under close supervision of existing staff. The employer that provides the training derives no immediate advantage from the activities of the intern, and on occasion its operations may actually be impeded. The intern is not necessarily entitled to a job at the conclusion of the internship. The employer and the intern understand that the intern is not entitled to wages for the time spent in the internship. This infuriates me. At best he's asking you to live off your parents, a choice not everyone can make, but he doesn't care if you live under a bridge. Those 12-hour days mean you can't even work some part-time thing, and it's basically a 6-month job interview. So he leeches off your free labor while you draw on your independent means. And this is the kind of guy who bangs on about how important it is to be able to pay your own way in life. Unless you're him, I guess. Reposting from the last time this question came up. Background: Australian chef, usually breakfast chef. I was looking for a job as a chef. I have the right skills, experience and background, so I get an interview at what seems to be a Chinese food takeaway store that has recently been closed down and sold to the person who is interviewing me. The store is at the opening to a food court. He explains he wants to open up a breakfast coffee store and goes on and on about the coffee machine he's going to buy, and I start wondering where this is going. I'm a chef, not barista. He proceeds to show me the kitchen, where there is only 2 stovetops. The rest of the fit out is these massive woks that were obviously used by the previous business, and it was not suitable if I was going to have to make to order cafe-style breakfast. I could not cook on the woks, and 2 single stovetops are simply not enough if I have more than 2 orders at all. I think maybe he is planning to refit the place and continue the interview. Then he takes me on a tour of the nearby food court. There are McDonald's and lots of cafes, and he says to me, I want to make what they don't. I want to have customers coming for what we will be selling. Big Aussie breakfast. Then we return to the empty store and he wants me to list Aussie breakfast food I will make, along with ingredient lists for each. Then suddenly he adds I will have to work from 7 a.m. till 3 p.m. Not only cooking big Aussie breakfast to order, but I will also have to make coffees to order from the new machine he is supposedly buying, by myself. Be a chef and a barista, open the store by myself, everything. Red flags are going up everywhere. Second bombshell: I will not be paid hourly, I will be paid a flat rate of $400 a week. I almost noped out of there but wait long enough for him to hit me with his finisher. After 3 p.m. my wife will come in and this will change over to an Indian restaurant. I briefly wonder how he is going to do this with giant woks and 2 stovetops and just shake my head, thank him for the interview and leave. Also 2 weeks later I had gotten a new job in a nice sane little cafe, and the guy calls me and begs for me to come work at a stupid breakfast barista Indian takeaway job with its big dumb woks, because other people he have interviewed have not wanted the job. Please, he even upped it to $450 flat a week. I just hung up. I wonder if he ever got that place off the ground. Just out of curiosity, was this guy and or his wife actually Indian? If not, it would add an entirely separate and delicious layer of crazy to the whole thing. That said, dude sounds like he has neat ideas, just desperately is in need of someone to ground him in reality. Are also in pay rates. I was really short on cash while waiting to hear back from a job opportunity with a company that takes a notoriously long time in the hiring process, and saw a job that was offering $25 an hour for some fire safety company, no other info, with a tagline saying, "Just because it seems too good to be true doesn't mean it is." I thought it was at least worth looking into. Went to the interview, which apparently was a group interview. The guy stepped out and the first thing he asked was if anyone researched this company on the Better Business Bureau. A few people did. He spoke with them in another room, and then they never came back. Then he started to launch into this drawn-out story about the last 30 years of his life, how someone gave him the same opportunity he was offering one of us now, and that it honestly made him cry, thinking that people were so cynical that they would think he was a scam artist. And he actually did begin weeping in front of everyone, at which point his 20-something assistant ushered him out of the room before coming back and emotionally launching into his own story about how this guy saved him and was a genuinely great guy. Honestly, I didn't have a lot to do that day and the interview was catered, so I stuck around to see what would happen when the guy came back into the room. And he did, with the vigor of an infomercial host, promising everyone that with a $600 deposit, they would be making $100K in 6 months' time. He just wanted a chance to interview each of us one-on-one. At the one-on-one, he started to talk a bit more about how this would be a great fit for me, blah blah blah, and I just stood up, asked for the application I filled out. It had my personal information on there. Told him that this was so obviously and clearly a scam that I hoped that there wasn't anyone dumb enough to actually write him a check. He called me a cynic and had his assistant escort me out. Edit. I found the Rip-Off Report webpage. Did anyone else in the Philly area come across these guys? Got your application back though, I hope. That or watched your credit cards for possible fraud for the next, well, ever. I did get my application back. It's the only reason I entered the room for the one-on-one. I had placed my resume on a few job sites and accidentally left my resume open to the public. You should not do that. I had gotten a call for an interview for an insurance thing. I was young and lacked common sense, so I excitedly went. When I got there, there was about 20 other people waiting to be interviewed. Turned out to be a group interview where some handsome bleached teeth dude talked about how great the job was, where we could set our own hours and make as much money we wanted. All we had to do was pay a lot of money for their special training, and riches beyond our wildest dreams would come of it. Somehow the stupid slapped me in the face and I got up from my chair and started to walk out. The con man asked me where I was going, and I calmly said, "This is a scam," and I advised others to walk out too. 2 others left with me. Edit 1, it wasn't a flack, but Liberty Mutual. Edit 2, I said to not put your resume public, but that is subjective. If you're super desperate for a job that you will literally take anything, then, by all means, if you want, make it public. If you really need a job, but you can afford to be slightly picky, then don't post it public. You're subject to so many predatory companies like a flack and door-to-door sales. Instead, search every day and read each job description and job requirement. Then, decide if the job is right for you. You can lower your standards if you'd like, but at least you have a better chance of not getting sucked into potential scams like this. Edit 3, you don't have to follow my advice. It's only advice. I had the same experience when I was in my early 20s. I actually had my life insurance license because I recently left a job selling securities. They still wanted to charge me $200+ for their training and insisted it was different. I actually pulled my cell phone out, called another office that offered me a job the previous day and accepted the offer in front of the entire group interview. The bullshit con artist running the thing was seething. It should be noted the job I took was at Guitar Center, but that's besides the point. Frankly, I think making that con artist squirm in front of his audience of potential victims is worth whatever crap job you had to accept. Also, I'd have more pride in my work selling $99 guitars to awkward teens and street musicians than trying to fleece money out of idiots for a pyramid scheme. Also, I could sleep at night then. I wish I could say everyone got up and cheered for me and we all walked out, but that didn't happen. The guy could really sell snake oil and I think the other people thought I was an asshole. I just feel bad a couple of them were probably suckered in. In order to have gotten that kind of everyone cheers for you reaction, you'd have had to be as much of a manipulator as he was. Showing them the truth would have just made them feel sad and awkward, which you very well may have done for a few. Would be hard to tell the difference if the awkward staring was because they thought you were being a jerk or because they realized how they'd almost been played. In any case, you probably did better than most of us could have. You got the guy angry, which with that kind of sociopath isn't easy. Good job. This sounds like that time Southwest Advantage tried to convince me that going door to door selling books in a different state would make me a better person and I desperately needed their internship. This was a lab position interview for current undergraduates. It turned out to be a total fraud that was partially enabled by the university. How I got this interview was through a bio class. At the last 10 minutes of lecture, a speaker took over and announced that they were part of an organization that placed ambitious undergraduates into internships in the biological sciences. Great, me and my classmates say as we put our contact info down. I go through 2 phone interviews and they deem me in the top 15% of applicants, and as such I'd be attending an in-person interview. I excitedly go the next morning to the location and see 2 other people already waiting, which I find weird, but not that weird if some university-associated program is helping you find an internship. We do a group interview in some classroom on campus, where we talk about medical and graduate school, science skills and knowledge, etc. And we are told how they can put us in a unique opportunity for success in these fields. He asks us to silently read over a brochure for 1 minute. It's a brochure for fucking painting houses. College Works Painting, Student Painters Internship. College Works Painting web page is in bold on the front, with pictures of smiling students doing manual labor. The guy is sitting there with a big white smile, and starts the high-pressure tactics, implying we are already sealed into the job. I just packed up and left, as the guy peppered me with jabs about being a failure. One other interviewee left right after me, but the third unfortunately was hoodwinked into signing a contract thing on the spot. She told me right after and was really regretting it. Don't know what happened to her. Apparently this happens all over the country, and once students catch on they leave and then return a year or 2 later. I try to spread the warning to my incoming undergraduate friends. TLDR, went in for a biology lab opening. Halfway through they changed it to a house painting scam. Edit. Hilariously, if you Google College Works Painting Scam, the first result is themselves giving advice to college students on how to avoid pyramid schemes. Scam advice for students. College Works Painting web page. In every one of the 13 points, they repeat how College Works Painting is in no way a scam. Number 5 is especially funny, as that defines the entirety of the interview process. Here, top 10 reviews of College Works Painting web page is a pretty entertaining local review site for the service, which is filled either with clearly faked 5-star raving comments, "Thanks College Works Painting, I will use you again and refer my friends and family," or with absolutely abysmal reviews, without a doubt, the absolute worst choice one can make for an exterior paint job. Basically, it sounds like a bunch of confused college kids running around a property with no guidance, breaking shit and just painting things whatever color they want. Also, just Reddit search College Works Painting to see page after page of university kids all complaining about this shit company. The first thing I did when I got here was CTRL-F and search for College Works Painting. I was 17 and brand new to college when one of those once walked into my chem class and talked about the internship. There were so many red flags in hindsight, but the interviewing process was so long and difficult that it gave me a sense of legitimacy. I was kinda put off by the fact that they didn't give you a paycheck but would give you the entirety of your pay at the end of 6 months of free work, and the fact that all the students and adults that were interviewing me gave me the skeeviest used car salesman vibes, but decided to see the process through to the end since it promised a management position. Got to the first training, learned that it was door-to-door marketing followed by a summer of manual labor, did a week of that crap work, then realized what a huge freaking scam that whole company is, and it preys on the most vulnerable audience, unemployed university kids. Yeah, I hate college works. Shoulda pieced out before the first preliminary interview was done. I got a call about a marketing position I applied to in NYC. The posting seemed legit, but after I applied the red flags started flying. Their website said nothing about what they do or what services they offered, just about how much their employees loathed working at this place. Then they made the mistake of calling me. Within 30 minutes of applying, I know I had a damn good resume, but a response within a half hour was absurd. Then they just raved about me, told me they wanted to move me up to the group interview in 3 days, on Monday, in NYC. At this point I said yes, but I was highly suspicious of their super fast pace. Then came the research. I looked into the phone number they called from and that led me to a company with a similar name, which showed me that they were being deceptive of who they really are. The company was in the business of selling energy. Basically in the area, there are companies that resell energy from the electricity provider. No call, I just didn't go. I had read great reviews online about a local Montessori daycare right down the street from my house. Since I am Montessori trained, I made it my goal to work there as a teaching assistant. Even though they weren't actively hiring, I submitted my resume once a year for 3 years. The third year, I got a call. I arrived at the interview elated. I couldn't wait to work for them. I walked in and sat down with the owner. She started off by explaining how the new position had just opened up. Apparently, Susan, the lead preschool teacher for the last 10 years, was recently let go because the owner's youngest daughter just finished her Montessori training and the owner wanted to promote her into the lead teacher position. The owner told Susan that she could either work part-time as the daughter's assistant, with a huge pay cut, or she could leave. So, as you might imagine, Susan quit. The owner told me this story with absolutely no twinge of ethical awareness and a chilling lack of emotional investment. I was horrified. Then, I was told that I had the option to either be the aforementioned daughter's assistant teacher or her other daughter's assistant teacher. Yes, joy of joys. The owner and her 2 daughters ran all of the classrooms. No nepotism there. As I sat reeling from this information, with a growing sense of nausea and anxiety, the boss then began to prattle off a laundry list of daily tasks and responsibilities as well as personal pet peeves. We teach children manners here. They need to learn to push in their chairs. They have to walk around the rugs, not on them, etc., etc. I look at the clock and realize that the boss has been talking for 20 minutes straight and she hasn't asked me any questions. In fact, she hasn't even let me speak yet. I politely pardon myself for interrupting her and say, "I'm sorry, can I just ask, what are the hours for this position?" To which she responds, "Can I just finish? Let me just finish what I was saying." And then she delves into another 30 minutes. I'm not kidding you. I'm watching the clock, of rules, commands, and other babble. During her half-hour speech, I find myself getting increasingly anxious. The walls are closing in. I'm fading in and out, wondering if maybe I can fake needing to vomit and run out of the room and then just keep running, get in my car, and drive away. No, I say to myself, I am 30 years old. That is just pathetic. I'm not going to be scared off by this mean old bitch. Finally, it's been almost an hour. I grabbed my keys and set my portfolio decidedly on my lap. "I'm sorry," I say. "I have been here for 55 minutes and you haven't asked me a single question. You haven't allowed me to ask you a single question. And from what I can tell, this job is not going to be a good fit for me. I don't want to waste any more of your time." I get up to leave and the woman freaks out and starts arguing with me about how I was the one who sent her the resume in the first place and what makes me think that I wouldn't be a good fit, and how she'd probably just have to fire me anyway. I excused myself and scoot out of the room as fast as possible. I think that by the time I get home, I'm safe and it's all over. I open up my email to see that the woman has written a furious tirade about how rude and horrible I am. She goes on to tell me how she has never been so disrespected in all of her life and how she is shredding my resume. Hada. The LDR, psycho women who love power will sometimes use nepotism and abusive behavior to control daycare centers and other social service facilities. Be very cautious where you send your kids. I applied for a position as a manager of a restaurant. At the time I was already a general manager at another restaurant, and I had years of management experience. They called me and asked to set up an interview, which I accepted. When I arrived 15 minutes early I checked in, and was told to take a seat, where I waited for 45 minutes past my scheduled interview time. When I was finally interviewed, the interviewer was mumbling something about fucking asshole servers, then ranted to me about how upset he was that a server was refusing to pick up a night shift. Then he used a bunch of derogatory terms for women about that server. As the interview progressed he would start side tangents about his staff and past managers. He then told me that while I applied to a manager's position they actually didn't have one available, and that I could serve tables until a position became available. I asked when that might be, and he said maybe 6-8 months. I read him the riot act in front of staff and customers about how much of my time he wasted, and how he should never talked about his staff like that, and about his professionalism. 8 months later the restaurant closed. 8 months later the restaurant closed. So what you're saying is, 6-8 months later a managerial position was available, as promised. You just had to provide a business to manage as well. Habaha. This reminds me of the McDonald's in Havelock North. It opened a few months ago and I went in one evening to get a burger. Some of the staff were bought over from the nearby Hastings store to obviously train the new hires, and they took a promotion at the same time. Anyhow, new girl was serving me at the counter, and the manager was belittling her every move, saying you should be doing that faster, do this, do that, why are you standing there, as she waited for my burger to be made by the kitchen staff. I loudly said to the manager at the other end of the counter in front of about 15 waiting customers, excuse me, you should talk to your staff like that in front of customers. Belittling them does not make a good manager, and Danielle is actually doing a very good job for her first day. I think you should pull your head. And she went all red in the face and walked out the back. I went on a job interview while employed at my current company, a company that is safe, with great co-workers and a laid-back fun environment. However, the salary was less than industry average, and a long commute. So I applied at another place. As I am in the interview, it is going great, but then the reality of leaving my current job hits like a ton of bricks. I start babbling questions I was acing before, and then I realize I just wasn't ready to leave yet. I knew me leaving would hurt the company immensely, and that leaving would hurt people I know considered more friends than co-workers. So I told my interviewer and he understood completely. He saved my record on file and ended the interview on a good note. The first nice story I've read so far. Are you still working with the original company? You should try and negotiate a higher wage with them. Companies generally rather pay a hard-working loyal employee more than lose them and have to go through the cost of hiring and training a new employee. Cautiously, when I had people who came to me with I have this other offer that pays X, I told them to enjoy it. If they came to me that they had been doing research on similar jobs, and felt the work they were doing was worth X because of Y, then we'd talk. But I also tried to break the concept that you could only get large raises by finding a new position. My vision is so bad I can't drive. I applied for a retail job a number of miles from my house, going for a day shift that would allow me to use public transportation or get a ride from family to get back and forth. I arrive a bit early, and they are not ready for me, so they direct me to wait in the greeting card section. I end up reading almost every greeting card and feeling awkward as customers pass and stare at me as the clock ticks away past my appointed interview time. It was a full 45 minutes before the woman who told me to wait in the greeting card aisle shows up, complaining they were wondering where I was, before leading me back for my interview. I speak with the woman handling the interviews for about 3 minutes before she tells me they don't have any openings in the shift I applied for. Never you mind, they advertised it. She informs me I'll have to work the evening shift, and that I should expect to be working well past the closing time of 11 p.m. to clean up afterwards. I got the distinct impression she was discussing unpaid overtime with regards to that. When I explained that I couldn't do that, and that I had even brought up that fact in my initial phone interview, I was told I could take it or leave it. The smile on her face indicated that she thought I was between a rock and a hard place, and that I had no choice but to take the job. I just turned and walked out, apologizing to my ride for having to wait so long due to a bunch of assholes. TLDR, my would-be boss thought someone with a disability would have no choice but to work for her with no accommodation for the disability. 2 this year. First one was for what was the agency had sold to me as a senior role with 4 direct reports. Within seconds it became apparent that it was actually an entry-level role with a salary £10k lower than I'd been told. The interviewer was mortified. He'd been told that I was a graduate looking for his first role etc. etc. We both agreed to pull the plug after 5 minutes. The second was for a fashion retailer. Again, it was a lower spec role than I'd been told. The difference here was that it was via direct interaction with the company. They had misrepresented it on the advert. The interview itself consisted of 3 people, one of whom was too nervous to ask questions, the second was disinterested, and the third stared at me incessantly through the whole interview like Legolas on anti-ADHD drugs. Is this a Scientology thing? After 10 minutes I just got up and walked out. Nobody said anything or tried to stop me. Interviewer 1 stared at his hands, interviewer 2 stared out of the window, and Legolas stared at me all the way to the door. Did a group interview once for a family-style restaurant. They referred to it as a casting call. There were at least 20 of us, and the manager kept going on and on about how much she wanted employees who were people persons, said with a large fake smile on her face. She then went on about what a strict regime she led at the restaurant and just acted like an all-around horrible, micromanager. I mean, at least she was honest about it all. But in the middle of her little speech, I just got up and walked out. Oh man. I hate that fake smile thing. I can see it in my head. I would have walked out as well. I was at an interview for a call center sales position at the local telecommunications company. I've had a few interviews that has a test. Usually it's questions like you're in X situation. What do you do? Show how fast you can type kind of crap, administered to a group to eliminate a group of candidates faster before doing in person. However, this interview turned out to be a 2-hour test that was the MMPI with the critical questions blanked out. If you don't know, it's a 550+ true-false test used with psychologists to assess personality and mental health issues, with the critical questions that figure if you are schizophrenic and seeing shit or suicidal. It's been years for me since I've had to remember what's on this test. I was like 1. Why do they need this data? 2. Could they hold it against me later if they think I'm crazy? 3. Why should I waste my time for doing a test 4 hours for a $14-hour job? 4. These interviewers are idiots. Best is, the test has a lying scale, so if you just checked whatever it would know, if they were even scoring it right. I walked up with the test and said I was a psych major. I know what the test is, and what was the point of this, as it has nothing to do with selling phone plans, and noped out of there. Buddy of mine got a job there and said it was the standard soul-sucking call center shithole, so I didn't miss out on anything. Edit. Should have added a month later. I ended up working for the call center across the street. $19 an hour to start a no BS interview. The place was with the coolest co-workers, who many I still am friends with years later, despite after the call center got closed and moved overseas. As a cook, I've been through many interview processes I wanted to leave. The only time I actually did was when I went into a tiny one-man show type thing, and the guy sits me down to talk. Just then a customer comes in and he serves them food. I figure it's fair enough considering he's the only guy there. When he's done he asks me to go into the kitchen and wash some dishes while he leaves. I washed a sink full of dishes before I left. Fuck that guy. The LDR, guy doing interview leaves before conducting it. Still wash dishes though. I was 19 when I showed up for a shift interview as an administrative assistant at this business. He told me over the phone that he owned his own business, it was growing, and he needed someone to pay bills, write letters, answer the phones, etc. The business is a residence. He answers the door wearing shorts and a t-shirt. He's about 35. He ushers me into his empty house and into the office in his basement. The office is a single desk. Other usual basement stuff fills the basement, old couch, storage tubs, and an old TV. He explains that the other two employees are off today and asks me to do some filing in the one drawer of the desk. He steps outside to take a phone call and I am completely freaked out. I am alone in this guy's basement. I realize no one else knows I'm here. While I sort his messy desk, the guy sits on the couch reading a book, and goes outside several times to speak on the phone. Finally, at lunchtime, he says he prefers if I bring lunch and eat there. I tell him I had planned on picking something up for lunch, so he offers me food from his fridge so I don't have to go out. I politely decline, grab my purse, and get out of there. Never looked back. Maybe this was completely innocent, but it felt very, very strange. Are you deciding to have any kids soon? We'd rather not hire you than have to fire you when you're knocked up. I was 15 at the time. Another time, I was around the same age. I was being interviewed for a babysitting job. All of a sudden she hands me a sheet of chores including making dinner and being a waitress for the parents, cleaning the chimney and gutters, laundry had to be washed, folded, and put away, cleaning toilets and times, every room had to be vacuumed. She then said that the kid would be on daycare so I'd have plenty of privacy. I just left. Did she assume a 15-year-old was applying for a nanny housekeeping position? WTF. How much were they paying? Pretty sure it's illegal to fire someone just because they're pregnant. Actually, I'm in Canada, not sure about US laws, so who knows down there? Yes, it is illegal in the US. Wikipedia webpage. It might be difficult to prove that your pregnancy is the reason you were fired, but it is definitely considered a form of discrimination. When I had an interview in a bar for a part-time student job, I would always come in an hour or so early, sit down, have lunch or a couple of coffees and just taste the atmosphere, so to say. I mean, the place is going at pay me peanuts, which I know and I accept, so at least the vibe has to be good. One time while I was scouting the place, a girl dropped a tray of drinks, breaking some glasses and wasting the drinks. No big deal, shit happens. A guy who was working with her started yelling at her, in front of the guests. An absolute no-go, even if there are no guests. Right there and then I got up, paid for my coffees and asked to see the guy I had the interview with, which turned out to be the yelling guy. Told him thank you, goodbye. Went for an interview at a school, which turned out to be a group interview, something I absolutely hate, because to my mind it shows a lack of respect for the individual candidates. It quickly emerged, from Buddy the other candidate was with the interviewer, that they had known each other for some time. It was obvious to me that the school had already decided who they wanted to hire, and that they had plucked some other poor sap at random from the pool of applicants to make the process look above board. I had already been given my travel expenses, so I had no qualms about saying, "Excuse me, I think we're done here," and leaving. Really pissed me off, given that I had traveled halfway across the country. Interviewing for corporate internal audit job after I graduated college. The interview with Company X was a 3-part process. Written exam, interview by HR person, and then interview by the person I would be working for. The test was a Briggs-Myers personality test. I am an INTJ and it was obvious that they were looking for a compliant worker bee. During the interview with the HR person, she kept going on and on about her concerns with my answers to the test, expressing confusion about why I had chosen to answer questions a certain way. She did not appreciate it when I pointed out that the instructions said to answer truthfully and not based on what answers we thought they were looking for. She then went on a 30-minute monologue about how the company valued interpersonal skills, cooperative collaboration, corporate culture, emotional intelligence and a bunch of other meaningless HR buzzwords. We got to the last question, which was, if you were a tree, what type of tree would you be? I told her, I am sorry, I do not think this company would be a good fit for me. She got very irate and accused me of wasting her time. She insisted that I provide an answer to the question because I need to complete the interview form. I responded, I am a hard-working, productive person and will not waste my time answering meaningless questions that have no bearing on my professional abilities, interpersonal skills, or work ethic. If your company expects its workers to waste time talking about what types of trees they would like to be, then I am not interested in working for this company, as it appears a significant amount of my time will be spent conforming to the corporate culture created by the HR department instead of making money for the company. I walked out. As I reached my car, I received a call from the department manager, Mr. Smith, who I would have been working for. He asked me why I left. I explained what had happened during the interview and that I was a hard-working, no BS, go-getter, and it seemed like the corporation was more interested in conformity with HR bullshit than with hiring productive people who wanted to perform work. He offered me the position on the phone and I respectfully declined. Follow-up. 2 weeks later, I was interviewing for a similar position with a smaller company. Very no-nonsense interview. While at lunch with the department manager, I was asked where else I was interviewing and if I had any outstanding offers. I told him I had interviewed at Company X and had an offer but would not be accepting it. He asked why. I said, based on the interview with their HR manager, I did not believe the place would be a good fit for someone with my work ethic and personality. My interviewer said, are you the guy that told off the HR manager because of the tree question? I raised an eyebrow. He said, excitedly, Mr. Smith is an old college friend and we were having drinks last week and he told me about your interview. My company wants its auditors to stand up to management. What do you need for a salary? I accepted the position at the second company. That day, 2 years later, Mr. Smith came to work for Company B. I went to an interview for a debt consolidation job, the kind of people who help those in debt work their way out by making it manageable for them. When I got there, the interview went fine, then all of a sudden I was told I'd have to pay £1,500, around $2,300, for licensing fees, business cards, leaflets, etc., etc. Not once in the application process did that information arise. About halfway through my question about the costs involved and why I would want to pay, the interviewer gets a phone call and apologizes but still answers. It's another person in my position calling with an update about how much money he's made this week. After some digging, once the call was over, I found out that I'd be self-employed, operating a franchise, and would make my money by being the face of other people's debt. All collectors would come to me for payments. I would take a monthly payment to cover all costs paid out to creditors by the debtor. How I got paid was that I'd actually keep 100% of the first monthly payment and negotiate directly with the creditors for lower monthly repayments, but wouldn't let the debtor know. I'd simply pocket the difference as commission. I declined and left without finishing the interview. It was only after I'd left that I realized the call he took was probably fake too. I was finishing my degree in music education, and my university held a job fair for future teachers. It was great, and I actually landed my first job from it. School districts would set up little booths, and a representative would do on-the-spot brief interviews, looking to move selected candidates into the next round of applicants. There was one district from Indiana that just had a battery of questions they asked every applicant. I can't even remember why I wanted to talk to them, but I did. Several questions weren't applicable to a music situation, like, what would you do if a student failed a test, what are your views of how you would address standardized testing in your classroom, etc. The weird part was, I would ask a clarification question, and the interviewer would look kind of annoyed and just repeat the question slowly. After 3 of those questions, I said, thank you for your time, but I have no interest in teaching in your school system. If this is how you treat your prospective employees, I would hate to see the people that make it through this system, and then get to teach kids. It is so frustrating how many interviews I've had where they say they can't deter from the cues, and will repeat if necessary. I'm a teacher in interview season right now. For a job that involves you being empathetic, there is little that goes around during interview season. Sure, I was told that I would be training into a management position. I was excited but was sort of questioning them pairing me up with this guy and driving around town. Lo and behold, we are actually selling lamps door to door. I followed the guy for the morning, then got pissed that the interview was actually them getting me to try to work for free, and I walked out. And by walked out, what I mean was they stranded me in a bad part of town and I had to call my boyfriend to come get me. I applied at Main Hospital in town after completing nursing school. My father-in-law is an administrator there, my wife worked at the time in the education department, and I had completed all of my clinical experiences on one unit or another. 10 minutes into the interview, the education-led nurse asks me a scripted question with a very rude personal point to it. At this hospital we strive to be great. How can you help us be great? Your GPA was okay, but not great, so what evidence do we have that you would be worth hiring? I graduated nursing school with a 3.3. I started my nursing school perquisites with a 1.7. So I informed the interviewing group of how hard I had to work to elevate my GPA while working full-time. To which asshat smartpants responds, "So again, is there anything great about you?" I snapped because of her tone of voice, and replied, "My work ethic is fantastic, and since this hospital strives to be great," yes, I air quoted, "why do you pay your staff less than any other hospital within 100 miles? Why are there currently 80 unfilled RN positions? Why don't you offer competitive benefits? Why do your nurses continue to have to care for unsafe numbers of patients? And who in their right mind thought you were a good interviewer?" I stand up, walk to the door, and thank the other two interviewers before piecing the fuck out. Landing that job would have really jump-started my career toward becoming a Cerna, but was not about to put up with her shit when that hospital had the glaring issues it did. Small at firm, interview goes pretty well. We actually moved on from the "what are your credentials" to "how could we make you support this firm," so I'm pretty confident. At the end of the interview, the manager nods to me and says, "Well, I've got some other people coming in, but, well, sign this paper." He produces a blank sheet of paper. "Here, right corner," he says. "I'm not signing a blank paper. Hey, it's to make things go quicker." "Sorry sir, not signing that." "Well, no job then." He looked at me like he thought I'd crumble. "Okay." And away I walked. Fun fact, the man was arrested a few years later for fraud. Interview for a sales position started half an hour later than the time I was told and turned out to be a group interview. Job also wasn't as advertised. It was a sales position, but it was phrased to make it seem like you were based in the actual building answering calls for potential or already existing clients. We also didn't realize the position was to sell window blinds and 3 people left. After finding that out, about 10 minutes into the interview, they then told us what the sales positions actually were: cold calling, door knocking, and being set up at a stand in the middle of a shopping center, being paid in commission and having to meet weekly sales goals. I walked out after hearing that and realizing that this was going to go on for a while, and I had another interview later on that afternoon. I stood up, told the person running the interview, "Sorry, but I've got to go." She looked really exasperated and someone yelled out at me, "Really not?" She stopped the interview, asked, "Does anyone else want to leave?" And 2 other people stood up and bolted. The interview ended up lasting about an hour. I was waiting for the bus to show up the whole time and ended up catching it with everyone else who was at the interview. I've done it several times. Usually because I discovered too late that it's the aforementioned MLM pyramid scheme or telemarketing. One time it was because the compensation was insulting. Another time, the job listing said full-time, which was strictly what I needed, and they apparently changed their minds between posting the job and interviewing me for a non-negotiable part-time position. Funny thing, when you're desperate for full-time work, you'll apply for anything and everything, and find yourself very nearly sucked into some quite unfavorable career situations. I had been invited to an interview, being one of those folk that stand on the open-top buses in cities and spout inane dribble to tourists for hours at a time. To be honest, the job seemed fun, and the girl I spoke to for the brief phone interview seemed bubbly and sane. I was invited to an interview at 11:30, which would last an hour or so. An hour in, and 30 of us were in a tiny room getting a presentation on how great the company is to work for, complete with PowerPoint pictures of buses. Wow! Then they said we'll start the interviews one at a time now, so please wait patiently. They took one person in for a 45-minute interview. After the first one it was pretty obvious they were going to be doing this one at a time. I decided to bail, told them my time was more important than this, and went and sunbathed in the park across the road. Another time it was for a marketing job that involved preying on poor people and government grants and the like. Really shady stuff. The interview was the guy telling me how he only started 6 months ago and now he's super rich, and he can see great potential in me. I'm going to be fast-tracked for management. Then he practically forced me onto a bus going to a really low-income neighborhood with his apprentice, some other poor soul he'd sucked in last week, and said I could do a full day's trial. I asked when we'd be back and he said we'd get to the office at about 10 p.m. and then do our day's paperwork for a few hours. Turns out they expected me to work from 8 a.m. Got to be there for the day's mandatory motivational meeting, until after 11 p.m. 6 days a week, to work on one of the worst rates of commission I've ever seen. No thank you. Saw how they treated the folk at the first house and just wandered off. They didn't come after me, so I guess my management potential had worn off by then. I applied for a job with the MHRA as a medical device auditor a few years back. I wasn't going to apply for the job as I work more in the pharmaceutical sector, however the advert said that no knowledge was needed to apply as full academic and on-the job training would be given. So I applied and got an interview. I went into the building with a couple of the projects I had worked on, anything confidential redacted of course, and brimming with my knowledge of regulatory procedures. I sat in a small all-glass meeting room with these 4 people around this table. One by one they started asking me very in-depth technical questions on medical devices. I thought maybe this was a preamble to see if I knew anything, but nevertheless started sweating absolute bullets. They kept going with the questions, with practically every answer I gave going I am not sure about that. I would have to consult the appropriate literature. After about 10 minutes of this torture I asked, I am sorry, but is this knowledge required as part of the application? The head honcho said, well yes, you're applying for this job, we would have thought you would have knowledge on the technical side of it. I stood up and said your job advert led me to believe that this was a training position and that I did not need any technical knowledge. Thank you for your time. At that I turned, revealing my sweat-soaked back. Light blue shirt was probably a bad idea. Left the meeting room feeling quite high and mighty that I had the balls to cut it short and say that. I then quickly went back to the meeting room to ask if someone would be able to let me into the lift so I could get out. That sucked. I always maintain the why advertise a position saying no technical knowledge required if you want technical knowledge, and why invite someone for an interview who, based on their CV, has no experience with what you're after. I had applied to work at Kmart. I had experience with sales working registers, so, essentially, that's what I applied for. Well, I walked in, told the girl at the customer service desk I was there for my application interview. So, the girl behind the desk was the same girl that would be conducting my interview. She looked at me, told me that the positions I had applied for were not needed all that bad, but they did need a maintenance person, and that I could start right then and there. I honestly thought I was being pranked until I looked over at the desk again. Behind this lady was a mop, bucket and some cleaning supplies. She was not joking. As she was telling me what I'd be doing, I hadn't even agreed to the maintenance position. I just up and walked out. Nope. Not doing it. I was being interviewed for an entry-level lit position at my local public library. The interview was fine at first with the basic entry-level lit questions like do you know how to replace hardware within a computer and do you know how to install software, Windows etc. It was a great interview with the head of it. Then his size admin who was part of the interview started asking complicated as fuck questions that I honestly wouldn't know the answer to without going to college for a couple years. It was such an entry-level job, all I needed was A+ certification. I wound up walking out saying, "I'm sorry, you're looking for someone with a college or university degree to work an entry-level position. This position is not for me." I got a call back a week later and was offered a part-time job which I turned down instantly because I interviewed for full-time. I later found out from my sister that they had hired 2 people to work part-time instead, both of which were just fresh from high school with barely any computer experience aside from resumes and essays. One they had 2 fired for being useless and the other got the full-time position. I regret nothing. I applied to a job as a companion for an elderly man. The ad sounded simple enough: just keep him company and make sure that he doesn't hurt himself. He had Alzheimer's. When I showed up for the interview, the daughter started showing me around her house and explaining all that I had to do: toilet him, give him medication, administer certain medical procedures, etc. I was 17 and they offered $9 an hour. When we sat down to discuss my start date, I politely told her that this was not the job I thought it would be and wished her luck. I hate when families do that. I worked hospice administration for a while and I had one lady, when told the price for her husband's care, reply, "What? No. I will pay the boy across the street to take care of him. He's a good boy, 15 and on the honor roll." Her husband was basically in a coma, needing full care, rotation to stop the spread of sores, pain medication, serious stuff, and this whack job is outsourcing the work to a child. Yeah, it's such a shame. I work at a nursing home and a lot of the patients we get are from families who either can't continue to look after their loved one or seniors who are left in improper care. We had one resident admitted with an advanced med sore because his family had a personal caregiver without medical training. He died after a few weeks because of it. On a side note, I've always wanted to work in a hospice. What's it like? I came into an interview for a management position and fully expected to have a good 2 to 3 hour interview with at least 5 people in the room. I got an 18-minute interview with 2 people. Walked out. I knew they did not want me, so I left. Later on I talked to a person inside the company and the position I was interviewing for was already predetermined to be filled, but according to HR, they had to interview people. That was bullshit to waste my time. I was asked whether I am religious. Upon answering no, the business owner and HR manager, husband and wife, took the time to try and convert me to JW. After nearly 20 minutes of JW talk and no job interview-related questions, I pointed out that asking about religion, sexuality and political views were big no-nos of any interview. Needless to say, these people ignored me and kept talking about religion, so I stood up and left while the owner was mid-sentence. I only walked out of because the interviewer insulted me the whole time. I was looking for a full-time, MF9.5 job that would give me some office experience. I received a call at 8 p.m. the night before asking if I could come in around 3 p.m. the next day. Sure, why not? I had an interview with another company earlier that day which went really well. I ended up getting that job, so I was feeling very optimistic about this second opportunity. I arrived 15 minutes early, signed in and waited while having a friendly chat with the receptionist and another applicant. My interviewer, some super giggly young woman, granted she was older than me but did not give off any managerial authority, shook my hand and let me into the conference room. Thought it was weird that she did not even bother to shut the door or even put her phone away. I tried not to be judgmental as I did not want to throw away this chance. The interview starts and she asks me the standard stupid questions. I only gave a few answers when she stops me and goes, "I feel like your answers are not coming across as you want them to." Okay. As if she was paying attention to anything I am saying while she was glancing at her cell phone every 30 seconds. Then she asks me how many interviews I have had, and so I told her just one other recently. She proceeds to inform me that she is going to teach me how to give a proper interview and has me close the door. This girl goes on about how she has this great job opening that is available because there was so much drama between the women there that one eventually left, and asked me if I gossip. I told her that was not a problem, then says my answers are not good and that I most likely won't get the position if she turns them into her boss. At this point I was biting my tongue to not say anything snarky. Back when she finally tells me that I am not friendly and I need to smile more, boy did I want to smack the root out of her. I told her I was hoping to get the job because it would help me gain office experience and, once I had my degree, give me more opportunities in the legal field. She tells me she has contacts in the legal field and goes back on her cell phone to text her friend that might be able to get a job because I probably will not get this job since I am not qualified, and asks what I think. Here is when I finally decided my dignity was not worth dealing with this bitch. I told her, you know what, I think I am going to go. I am tired of being insulted. I had a great interview earlier today, so I don't think I am the problem here. Then reached over the table, grabbed my resume out of her hand and told her not to call me. As I opened the door I turned around to look at her shocked face and loudly said, oh, and by the way, I will be sure to let your boss know about your improper behavior and use of cell phone during the interview. Stormed the fuck out of there and left. Saw her a few years later at job fair. I was recruiting and running a table. She was seeking a job. Guess she recognized me because she stayed away from my section the whole time. TLDR, told rude interviewer she was a dumbass, strolled out with what was left of myself. Respect. Later notice her at a job fair where I was recruiting and she was job searching. Went for an interview at an oceanographic research company. It's in a different town than where I lived, and had used the last of my savings and money for fuel to drive the 40 kilometers to this place. I'm a very punctual person, so I arrived at the offices about 10 minutes early. So I walk in and the first thing the people at the office say is that I'm too early, by 10 minutes. They then give me a test to fill out, which I do, and once more some blah blah comments. Interview time. They pitch the job as a recruitment position, which I'm fine with. But then as the interview goes on they reveal that I would only be recruiting foreigners for internships as a full-time job, and that they would pay me in total about $2,500.00 a month, which is about $200 US. So I stood up, gave the woman her test back, took me CV and just said thank you for wasting my fucking time and money and fucked off. I interviewed to be a property manager for an office complex. We did the interview with a regional director and the company's HR director. The interview took place in the office of the property manager they were to hire. About 15 minutes into the interview the regional director's phone rang on loud. Instead of apologizing and continuing on, he answered the call. He was very loud on the phone and didn't even say anything about being in the middle of an interview. The HR director looked at me and gave me a look that was like, sorry, he thinks he is a big deal. I looked around while he was on the phone and noticed there was a camera on the ceiling with their company logo on it that faced the property manager's desk. That was the last straw. I stood up and shook the HR director's hand and thanked him for his time. The regional director, who was still on the phone, asked me what was going on. I told him he is rude for not only answering his phone but taking the call. No one is that important and he can go to hell. Felt good walking out of there and never regretted it at all. Did it twice. First time was when it became very rapidly apparent they wanted me because I was white. They made several comments about Asian and Indian applicants, and at first I thought it was just really bad wording, because like it or not, if you don't have a clear grasp of the language you're supporting in, it's a nightmare, especially on the phone. But when I pointed out the majority of people I've worked with in my career have been Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, and no one's had a problem with understanding them, the interviewer came out with, of course there are exceptions and that's the point. I walked out. Second one was a mob who knew I was working as a sole trader. I was just wanting to get back into 9-5 because while I was making good money, I could be making a lot more in corporate, and my husband and I want to buy a house, and tried to give me 2 hours notice to a second interview. The meeting was in Karam. I was in Campbellfield at the time, over an hour's drive away. Balls deep in migrating an incredibly physically unstable 2K3 server that had to be baited the entire time. I very politely told them I was currently on a commissioned job, and would not be able to make that time frame and suggested another day. They rather less politely told me that I had better show up, as whether or not I would even be considered for the job would be contingent on me being there, and there was no room whatsoever for negotiation. Show up now or don't show up at all. Basically told me to drop what I was currently doing as an employee, and go suck their cocks for an interview. I equally less politely told them to shove it up their arse. I wouldn't want to work for anyone who'd expect me to display that gross level of unprofessionalism, and I'd take a paying job over their potentiality any day. Unemployed as a student after getting laid off from a work-term job, company folded a week after I started, so no money and living at the other end of the country in a friend's parents' house until I found another job. Spent a month cold calling and trying for anything. Got an interview for a sales job. I don't do sales, but I'll learn anything at this point. Halfway through I realize it is a telemarketer job. I just left. I felt pretty bad when I had to tell my friends Dad that I walked out. I would do almost anything but not that. He was great about it. 2 weeks later I got a great gig driving a delivery van and moved out, so all worked out well. Bought my friend's parents a nice present with my second paycheck. Interviewed for a corporate support job. Seemed like a pretty sweet deal at first, good pay, lots of learning opportunities, etc. Then the interviewer told me that I would be on a rotating shift schedule including weekends and holidays, with overnighters about once a week, occasional double, 16-hour shifts, and that I would have to be available for emergency situations 24/7, 365 days a year. The initial job description had been vague about this, but I had assumed it was mostly a regular 9-5 thing. Final straw was when she asked if I would be able to handle not going home for the next 3-4 years, as I would not be able to take any vacations longer than 2 consecutive days. This was in Japan. I am from Sweden. I also had a newborn daughter. I replied that I'd rather not miss out on my daughter's childhood, thanked her for her time, and left. I was almost bait and switched. The company I worked for at the time kept hinting they weren't going to extend my contract, so I started looking for work. An agency I'd used before managed to get me an interview at a small business that was looking for a marketing assistant event coordinator, which was what I was doing at the time. The day before the interview, the agent I was in contact with sent me the job description. The ad on their website already had the JD that I had mulled over many times, but I decided to look at the one she emailed me anyway. Somehow the ad and original JD completely omitted the fact that not only would I be doing marketing and event coordination, but also I would be completely in charge of the company's finances for a measly salary of £15,000. That was less than what I was already on, in a job where I didn't have to do nearly as much as this new company wanted. I don't even have a clue about finance stuff at all, and this company was willing to give that role to a complete novice for a shitty wage. Needless to say, I explained all of that to the agent, who got angry at me because I would make her look bad in front of the employer if I canceled the interview. Apparently she begged and pleaded with him to interview me because they were about to choose someone already. Whoever they chose, good fucking luck to them. I went for an interview at a retirement home a few years ago for a maintenance position. I recently left a position where I was doing maintenance at a factory and really wanted to get that type of work back. I was filling out some pre-interview paperwork and one phrase kept jumping out at me: clean up. Now, I don't mind most types of cleaning, even bodily waste if I have to. I just couldn't shake the idea that I'd have to move a body at some point. They asked me to draw a dragon. I wasn't an artist. To be fair, it was for a temp position at our local fair as a face painter. I walked out after realizing how naive I'd been. I assumed they would give us training. I was 20 at the time. Anyway, somebody fucked up and sent me a schedule even though I told them I wasn't qualified and walked out. My mom insisted I go to the first day, so I did. They told me they hadn't contacted anybody by letter for the position, and they were snotty about it even after I showed them the letter with my schedule. I could see they felt like I was mentally disabled. Anyway, they set me up painting a kid's face. I used the diagrams on the walls of the booth. The lady who managed it ran over to me and openly admonished me because they don't paint around the mouth when the diagram clearly showed that. The kid loved it though. So whatever, she took me off painting and had me take money and tickets. I finished out the day, miserable and exhausted. I went home and cried. Never showed up for the second day because they made it obvious all day I wasn't wanted there. I was asked if I lived a Christian lifestyle. When I replied that if by a Christian lifestyle you mean go to church every Sunday and read the Bible often, then no. However, if you mean do I abide by all of the laws in this country, which let's face it, are based on the Christian values brought there by the first European settlers who formed NZ's first government, then yes. I got a strange look and told we do not appreciate our values being joked about. I then told them where they can stick their values in their job and walked. Oh wow, that happened in NZ? I can only presume it was some sort of Christian company or something. I had a phone interview and hung up. Place said they were hiring EMTs. I am an EMT. Interviewer, men's clinic, we deal with erectile dysfunction. B. Okay. Interviewer, do you know what a priapism is? B. Yes. Interviewer, we are going to train you to handle those. It will at times involve needles. B. Click. Priapism is that longer than 4-hour erection. It signals shit is going wrong. Sorry, but this makes perfect sense to me. A men's clinic that deals with erectile dysfunction and other genital-related ailments would probably want EMTs on staff. Even if it's a valid position to seek EMTs for, I can understand someone who has EMT training and wants to work in that field not wanting to go forward with a job that is solely needling penises.